The trauma is still pulsing in your hips, and the new year won't dissolve it. That old rigidity you carry at the base of your body is the real reason why 2026 will begin exactly the way the previous years ended. The generative core, the region meant to sustain movement, pleasure, and initiative, remains locked in a constant state of defense. And as long as that defense is not sealed at the bodily level, no mental intention will be strong enough to open a different cycle. There is an ancestral rite of passage, used at moments of transition, that sends the nervous system the only signal it recognizes as permission to close a pattern. This ritual acts directly where the trauma settled, through subtle pelvic adjustments, manual pressure on the basin of the body, and a guided breath into the lower abdomen that reorganizes somatic memory. If you close this video now, the containment that defines your steps, your choices, and your presence in the world will continue to govern every attempt to begin again. The passage you celebrate with champagne requires a seal that happens in the flesh, and that seal is about to be revealed. The base of the body holds an archive that does not respond to decisions or willpower. It is a living record of everything that was never completed and that the nervous system still treats as present. This archive concentrates in the pelvic region, where deep fascia stores protective patterns as if they were survival instructions, keeping the hips braced even decades after the original event. When this area remains rigid during the transition from one cycle to another, the body operates as if danger was still active, and the capacity to initiate, create, and sustain movement becomes subordinated to a defense that never received a signal of closure. The ancient Egyptians called the pelvis the cauldron of vital force, the place where creative energy is born before rising through the spine. In initiation temples, no priest crossed a sacred threshold without first receiving a sealing ritual at the base of the body. The masters understood that carrying old patterns into a new cycle meant contaminating the future with the residue of the past. The passage was not marked by words or intentions. It was inscribed into the body through precise gestures that told the organism a cycle had truly ended. What those initiates practiced finds resonance in what neuroscience now maps with clarity. Stephen Porges demonstrated that the autonomic nervous system reads safety or threat through bodily signals, not thoughts, and that the pelvic region is among the first to contract when the organism enters a protective state. That contraction can become chronic, operating beneath awareness as a permanent alert that diminishes mobility, pleasure, and openness to the new. When you try to begin a new year while carrying this rigidity at the base, the body silently sabotages every intention, because it is still responding to a cycle that was never closed. A change in the calendar does not alter this pattern. It only layers another round of frustration over the same ancient defense. The generative core remains unavailable, and the force meant to sustain your projects, your relationships, and your presence in the world stays trapped in a containment that is still waiting for a signal that never arrives. One woman discovered this in the most difficult way, after years of repeating the same cycle of creative paralysis and quiet exhaustion, until an unexpected encounter revealed exactly where her body had locked and what needed to happen for the passage to finally complete itself. Angela was 50 years old, with a body that seemed to have forgotten how to move forward. As an educator, she spent her days holding space for children, colleagues, and responsibilities, yet there was a rigidity in her hips that followed her everywhere, in every delayed decision, every project that died before beginning. It was not ordinary tension. It was something older, a weight at the base of her body that no night of sleep dissolved and no therapist could clearly name. The trauma pulsed there, quietly and constantly, shaping her life into a sequence of restrained movements she no longer recognized as limitation. There was a disconnect between her waist and her feet that she felt every day in every season. The lower body seemed to exist only to carry her, never as a source of impulse or pleasure. Relationships met an invisible wall. Creativity emerged, already suffocated. And the exhaustion she carried never matched the effort of her actual hours. Each new year only made more visible what her body had been holding all along, a defensive pattern with no end date, repeating the same cycle of creative paralysis and silent depletion. Yoga, physical therapy, acupuncture, meditation retreats. Angela tried every approach that promised relief, and each one offered results that lasted a few days before the rigidity returned to the same place. Therapists spoke about accumulated tension. Teachers suggested more stretching. But none of the explanations reached what she sensed was the real root of the issue. Over time, Angela began to accept that maybe this was just how it was, that her body had decided to harden, and managing the discomfort was all that remained. She was standing in line at a coffee shop when a woman beside her commented, without any obvious context, that she held her hips as if she were protecting something precious. Before Angela could respond, the stranger introduced herself as a somatic therapist and said that the rigidity wasn't tension at all. It was trauma waiting for a passage to be released. She explained that ancestral cultures used the turning of the year as a window to close exactly this kind of pattern, and that there was a practice capable of signaling to the nervous system that the cycle of defense had ended. Angela walked away with an email address and a few handwritten instructions on a napkin. On the night when the old year gave way to the new, while fireworks echoed in the distance, Angela followed each step written on that napkin. Feet on the ground, knees slightly bent, attention dropping into the lower belly. When she made the first subtle pelvic adjustment, she felt a sudden warmth rise from the base of her spine as her breath deepened on its own. Tears streamed down her face without explanation, and for the first time in years, her hips began to pulse with something that wasn't pain, something that felt like a long-awaited release. Now that same practice is in front of you, ready to be applied to your own body. Place your feet firmly on the ground, about hip-width apart, and allow your knees to soften just enough to release the lock in the legs. This minimal bend communicates something essential to the nervous system. You are not in fight and you are not in flight. You are available. Feel the weight of your body descending through your feet, as if invisible roots were extending toward the center of the earth without effort. Stay here for a few moments and notice what happens when you offer your body the kind of support it rarely receives in daily life. Grounding begins in the feet, and it prepares everything that comes next. Bring your attention to the lower belly, the area between the navel and the pubic bone, and simply notice what you find there without trying to change anything. There may be stored tension, there may be emptiness, there may be a sense that this region has been disconnected from the rest of the body for a long time. Many people realize they breathe only into the upper chest, as if an invisible boundary prevents the breath from reaching the base. If that's your experience, acknowledge it without trying to fix it. The body releases only what has first been seen. Awareness itself is already movement. It is already the beginning of change. Keep your feet grounded and your knees soft as you begin the first pelvic micro-adjustment, a movement almost imperceptible from the outside, yet profound internally. Gently tilt the pelvis forward, then back, as if tracing a small arc with the sacrum in extremely slow motion. Move so slowly that someone watching might barely notice anything at all. This slowness is essential because deep fascia does not respond to force. It does not respond to urgency. It yields only when it senses safety and enough time to reorganize. As you continue, you may begin to notice sensations that weren't there before. A subtle warmth spreading at the base of the spine, a quiet pulse awakening in the hips, an unexpected urge to breathe more deeply. Some people feel their eyes fill with tears for no clear reason. Others notice fine tremors in the legs, or a wave of emotion rising through the chest toward the throat. None of these responses are wrong or excessive. They are signs that the nervous system is receiving the message that something is shifting at the foundation. The body speaks through sensation, and these sensations are the language of change taking place. Add manual pressure to the pelvis by placing both hands over the hip bones, fingers pointing downward, palms offering firm contact to the pelvic structure. This pressure is not meant to push or force anything open. It is meant to give the body a sense of safe boundary, a defined edge that may have been missing for a long time. Many traumas settle in the base precisely because there was a moment when boundaries were crossed or ignored, and this manual contact rebuilds that border from the inside out. Your own arms become the embrace, the structure needed, the containment that finally allows release. Continue the pelvic micro-movements while keeping your hands steady on the pelvis, and notice whether the motion begins to find its own flow, whether the range increases naturally, whether a rhythm starts to emerge on its own. Allow this to happen without intervening with the mind. The body knows how to move when it receives both permission and containment. If you feel the urge to sigh, let it happen without restraint. And if a sound rises from the back of the throat, allow it to pass through. The containment you have carried for years also dissolves through sound, through breath, through what is finally allowed to leave. Before moving into the next layer of the ritual, there is something you need to know about Angela, something that happened that same night, while fireworks were still lighting up the sky outside. When Angela did exactly what you are doing now, when her hips began to pulse with something that was not pain, she realized she wasn't just releasing accumulated tension. She was closing a cycle her body had kept open for decades, waiting for a signal of completion that had never arrived through any other method. The warmth rising up her spine was trauma finally finding a way out without words. And the tears that streamed down her face were not sadness. They were the body recognizing that its defense had fulfilled its purpose and could now be released with dignity. That night, for the first time in years, Angela fell asleep with her hips at ease and her breath reaching places that had been closed for far too long. In the days that followed, changes she had never consciously sought began to appear in very tangible ways. Her steps became longer and more grounded. Her voice dropped into a fuller, more present register. Decisions she had postponed for months began to resolve themselves with an ease that once felt impossible. The trauma that had pulsed at her base had finally found a passage through ritual, and what remained was a body available for creation, movement, pleasure, and real presence. Angela did not become someone else. She became who she had always been, without the old weight silently directing every choice and every step. What she felt is the same process now beginning in you, as your hips respond to the micro-movements and your hands provide steady containment to the pelvis. The difference is that you have not yet completed the ritual. One layer still remains, the layer that transforms this experience into a lasting seal in the body, a mark that does not fade when you return to daily life. Now add directed breath into the lower belly. Inhale through the nose, guiding the air down into the space below the navel, as if you were filling the area you just awakened with living oxygen. As you exhale, release the air through the mouth in a soft, continuous sound, allowing the lower abdomen to gently draw inward without force. This breathing pattern shifts the internal state of the autonomic nervous system and communicates, in the only language it understands, that the passage is happening now. The body receives physiological permission to close the defensive pattern it has maintained for so long, waiting for precisely this moment. Repeat this breath while keeping your hands on the pelvis and allowing the hips to continue their subtle, organic movement. With each exhale, release what remains from the previous cycle. Everything that was held without resolution, everything the body stored while waiting for closure, can now leave through conscious breath. The passage you celebrate with champagne and promises happens here, not on a calendar hanging on the wall, but in living tissue finally receiving the permission it has been waiting for. Each breath becomes a seal. Each exhale becomes the body's signature, marking that what was old has truly come to an end. The central practice is now complete. The micro-adjustments awakened the dormant base. The manual pressure offered structure and safety to the pelvis, and the directed breath sealed the shift in the nervous system. What comes next is the final gesture, the one that marks this passage in the body and transforms a temporary experience into a stable anchor you can return to whenever needed. Notice the signals your body offers as confirmation that the rite has done its work. More weight settling into the feet, hips feeling looser and more available, breath reaching the lower belly without effort, and a quiet sense of readiness to enter 2026 with a foundation that can truly support what's new. These are not imagined sensations. They are the nervous system reorganizing itself, communicating that the trauma is no longer pulsing in the hips as an active defense. You may also notice a softer jaw, less tension in the solar plexus, or a gentle warmth rising from the base of the spine. Each of these signs is evidence that the passage has occurred in the body, not just on the calendar. To anchor this state, place your right hand over the lower belly and your left hand over the chest, creating a bridge between the released base and the center of the body, just as ancient traditions did when sealing rites of transition. Hold this position for 30 seconds while breathing naturally, feeling the warmth of your hands pass through the skin and imprint the tissue with the memory of what just occurred. This gesture can be repeated at any moment throughout the year whenever you need to reconnect with this state. The generative core now has a physical anchor you carry with you. In the days ahead, if you notice the old rigidity trying to return to the hips, or if the breath begins to rise back into the chest and abandon the base, pause where you are. Soften your knees slightly. Place your hands on the pelvis and repeat inwardly. The previous cycle is sealed. My base supports the new. This simple act interrupts the pattern before it reinstalls itself and reminds the nervous system that the passage has already taken place. Use it as often as needed. The tool is now yours. The seal is in the body. The anchor is in your hands. And the new cycle begins with a foundation that no longer carries the defense of the old one. What remains now is to recognize the magnitude of what you've just crossed and the larger field from which this transformation emerges. The body that supports you now is not the same one that began this video. There is more weight dropping through the feet, more space between the vertebrae, more availability at the base to receive what 2026 brings without the armor that once felt necessary. The generative core, once trapped in decades of silent defense, begins to pulse with a different quality, not as alarm, but as available force, ready to create, to move, and to sustain. These subtle shifts are the body recognizing that the passage has truly occurred, not in time, but in living tissue where the trauma once took root. The ritual you've just moved through belongs to an ancient lineage of practices our ancestors used to mark transitions and seal cycles in the body. There are other layers to this knowledge, other rituals that work with different regions where protective patterns crystallize. And each one opens doors you may not even realize are still closed. The path back to the body is ongoing, and what you experienced here is only the first seal among many that can be activated throughout the new cycle now beginning. Carl Jung wrote, "What we do not face within ourselves, we meet outside as fate." The trauma that pulsed in your hips was exactly that, a postponed encounter with a part of you waiting to be seen and released. By sealing this passage, you did more than release physical rigidity. You interrupted a destiny that would have repeated itself through restrained decisions, abandoned projects, and years that began carrying the weight of the last. The source that animates all creation recognizes when one of its own chooses to stop repeating and begins to truly cross through. If this ritual brought you clarity and a new sense of grounding, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Share this with someone you sense is carrying the same rigidity in the hips, the same difficulty beginning new cycles with real presence. Consider becoming a member of the channel to support the creation of content that unites science and ancestral wisdom at this depth, allowing this work to continue reaching those who need it. Write in the comments, "I close the old pattern in my hips and open space to create in 2026. This declaration anchors in the visible world the transformation that has already occurred in your tissue and seals your commitment to a new pattern. Another video is waiting for you on the screen. Now click to continue. The new year does not begin when the clock strikes midnight. It begins when the body finally releases what it carried from the year before and finds the ground to sustain what has not yet been created.